Well, it's Sunday morning, and instead of lying around in our pajamas, here we are. The dedicated hosts of How Not to Suck at Divorce were up and early, bringing you another fresh episode.
Right. And it's the perfect day that we shouldn't be recording and just laying on our couches, but here we are with makeup on. I'm super impressed by us.
I know it's like going to storm all day here in Chicago, and we're hiding from children and working. And this mic keeps like drooping down. I won't make the joke I made earlier about it because in case there are any like 7-year olds going through their first divorce who are listening to the show, they probably won't appreciate it. But you can imagine what I think that this thing looks like as it slowly falls downward. So, how's it going over there, Morgan? How's your life?
You know what? Last time we recorded, I thought I was dying from a cold. I felt like my husband, where they think they're dying if they get a cold, but that cold knocked me out. But I'm feeling so much better and re energized and ready to go and talk about our topic today, which is financials. Is there anything more exciting than that?
You know what? I can think of 100 things more exciting than financials, but I think that it's probably what what holds so many people back from taking this jump into their, divorce journey. So, I'm glad that we're doing this episode. We've gotten a lot of requests for something about financials. So, I think that today's episode is going to be more uplifting than I think what most people are expecting.
Yeah.
Because usually when you talk about financials, it's a little bit intimidating and scary. And it's basically like, oh, you don't know all these things that you should know. But today, I think our guest is going to make people feel a whole lot more comfortable.
I agree. Let's move right into it because everybody should feel more comfortable, especially on this topic.
So, I don't think I can afford to get divorced is something that we hear a lot.
Right. A lot of times, not all the time. I'm hearing clients come in, and what they're saying to me is they don't fully understand their financial situation. They believe they'll never have enough money to support themselves if they get divorced. Or I'm hearing that they're saying that their spouse is saying, you're going to be broke. You can't afford this as a way of control.
Right. Yeah. The control thing is huge. And I think that that makes people feel so scared. And even if there's not the control element, I think that people are just so terrified of the financial change that divorce represents.
Yeah, agreed. So today we're talking to somebody who's going to help us make sense of it all. His name is Phil Weiss. He's no stranger to podcasts. He's a regular panelist on Money Tree Podcast. He's the founder of Apprise Wealth Management. He's a certified CPA, CFA, and RLP. His inspiration for getting into the industry is his mother, which I can't wait to ask him about. So please welcome on the How Not to Suck at Divorce podcast, Phil Weiss to our show.
Thanks for having me today. Happy to be
Hi.
here. Looking forward to a good conversation.
Hi, Phil. Okay, so let's get this thing started with a question that's going to feel like a therapy session starter. But, Phil, let's talk about your mother.
All right. So this is kind of the why for how I'm a guy that works with women.
Okay.
Growing up in my household, it was a typical model that we always hear about. My father was responsible for the finances. My mother was primarily responsible for taking care of my sister and I. The problem was my father wasn't good at it. This is how not to suck at divorce. Well, my father sucked at managing finances.
Thanks for
We
being
had
honest.
Yes. We had unpaid bills, we had services turned off, we had no credit. I remember when I got my driver's license, having to go down to the local utilities to pay them so that services could get turned back on.
Oh,
Wow.
When it was time for me to go to college, like, told, "Go anywhere you want." With the benefit of hindsight, I shouldn't have listened, but, you're 18 years old, you make these decisions. So I decided I went to Duke, I was gonna be a doctor, I was a psychology major. After doing a lot, including speaking to the president of the university to find out ways to stay in school after my junior year, it was decided I owed the money. I had to pay what I owed. But until I did that, I couldn't go back.
Mm.
So I left school. I was working at home and ultimately I moved to Arizona. It was kind of a toxic environment. So I needed to get away. While I was away, my mother went back to school. she became an occupational therapist. I know that she really did that so that she would be able to stand on her own. I came back to school. I decided I wasn't a psychology major and a pre-med anymore. I was going to be an accounting major. Duke doesn't offer accounting degrees. I decided to go to Rutgers. I had residency in Arizona and New Jersey. I thought I'd get a better job coming out of Rutgers. Finished school, moved home. One day I come home, I get the mail, and there's credit cards with my name on them.
Mm.
There's only one thing. They weren't mine. My father had forged my name to open up credit card accounts
Oh boy.
because he couldn't get credit.
No gosh.
Right,
And
yeah,
one of the banks actually sent me the application. So before I confronted him, I had proof that this is what had happened. I got them taken out of my name and made sure they got all paid off, and the banks let them stay there because he had at least been making minimum payments. Shortly after this, my mother was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. That's when we realized how bad the financial situation really was. My mother asked me to help. I did what I could. My parents had to move out of their house because they were going to get foreclosed on. Those credit cards were now all well overdrawn. Like I said, I did what I could, but unfortunately, my mom didn't make it. Her breast cancer metastasized to her brain 18 months after her diagnosis. She passed away. So
Mm.
I view the work that I do today as trying to help other women avoid the kind of things that my mother went through. And you mentioned that I'm an RLP, that's a registered life planner. So part of that's experiential training. And so part of my life plan is to create a scholarship for women who go back to school later in life, like my mother did. I've started to fund it, but I'm far from being where I really want to be because I decided I'm going to do it on my own. I looked at other avenues, I didn't like them. So I've started to put some money aside, and eventually that's where it's going to go.
that's amazing. I mean, when people talk about their lives, and probably a lot of listeners are thinking to themselves, I don't know much about my financials. And then they hear your story. I mean, yours is like the worst of the worst of what you've been through, and you've picked yourself up, and now you're helping, primarily women. I know we have listenership of male and female. So I think this podcast is going to help both sides. But I would say, as a lawyer and a divorce lawyer, I do still see that women in general do have a little bit more lack of knowledge when it comes to financials. I think it's changing. The pendulum is starting to swing with more information and good information, but it's still kind of there. So I see why you probably, help primarily women. But let's talk about something that, I see a lot. What holds people back from making good decisions? I mean, what I see essentially is it's fear, it's lack of understanding. And if Andrea and I do anything in this podcast, it's just giving information, because we always say that knowledge is power. You can't make decisions unless you've got the knowledge. Right, Andrea?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I'll be the first to say that I've always been intimidated by money. I don't think I've ever really understood it very well. So, what do you see, Phil? Like why do so many people make mistakes? And is it because they're scared?
Part of it's because they're scared. And what's interesting is I remember I did a 3-part webinar to help women understand more about investing. One of the things that I thought was really interesting is that women, when they give them the same quiz about financial knowledge as men, if you remove "I don't know" as an answer, they'll score about the same. But
Oh,
there's a lack of confidence. That's a
Oh,
big part of it.
interesting.
And the other thing to me is our schools don't do a good job. We don't get any education. We're left on our own. My firm is called a prize, and part of the reason for that name is because it means to inform. So I like to educate. I like to help people understand. And I believe there's no such thing as a dumb question. It's only dumb if you don't ask it. Because if you don't know the answer and you don't ask, you're never going to know the answer. But many people suffer from fear and a lack of confidence. I think those are the two biggest things that I would say.
I agree with you 100%. I mean, if you think back to, if I think back to my high school, I don't think we talked about anything related to a bank account, what credit cards look like, what the interest rates are. I mean, it really is a disservice to our community to throw everybody into these, different education forms and not to talk about it any way, shape, or form. I think it really sets people up for a difficult future. I also think that it's kind of ridiculous because we had this, like your parents, Phil, we had this view in the world a long time ago that men were just supposed to know about money and women were supposed to do other things. And because of that, I think we are starting to switch a little bit. I see it in my practice, even since I started divorce as a divorce lawyer, the shift is coming. So I'm happy to see that. All right, Andrea, you have a question.
I think there's a few things here. I think that number one, we have to take the stigma of discussions about money being uncomfortable away. Because I think what happens is that women who are afraid of confrontation, I mean, I can't raise my hand high enough here, but and women who are people pleasers were afraid to broach a topic that we've all heard, like, right, the number one cause of divorce, number one cause of arguments is financial stuff and stress, the stress that that brings. And I think that we're so afraid to talk about it that it just the problem can get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then we kind of a lot of women just sort of fall to the background and let the other person make the decisions. And that puts you at a massive disservice when you're then looking to leave the marriage and you don't know what's going on. And I mean, I want to get right to the meat here because a lot of people are listening to this episode because of what it's titled, which is I don't know if I can even leave my marriage because I feel so financially stuck. So, Phil, let me throw a scenario at you and you tell me how we would handle this. So, let's just say a woman approaches you for consultation and she says, okay, I've been married for 15 years. I have no idea how I would even begin to support myself without my spouse's income. I don't even know. Can I not? I have no idea. I'm terrified of my life completely changing. So, where do you start with this person? What would be the first thing that you say?
So I actually take a step back
Okay.
because since I'm a registered life planner, I want to make sure that we know what it is that you really want because that's such an open question. What can I make it? Well, I don't know if you can make it until I understand what it is that you want, what matters to you. So we go through, I start with the life planning process because to me, that informs your financial plan. It informs what you can do and what you can't. Because you hear the stories about don't get that $15 latte, right? Because it's expensive. But if that's really important to you, maybe you can. It just means there might be something else you can't do. So you have to figure out what those things are that really matter to you. And those are the ones that we want to figure out if you can do.
Okay, so Phil, I'm kind of laughing because a registered life planner sounds like kind of, in the clouds, right? I'm like, where do you get one of those certificates? I think I need one of those. Can you plan my life? Because I'm struggling here. But also for the client that's actually like listening. And I would assume from what I see, people come in my door all the time. They don't know what they're eating for dinner that evening because they're so stressed about where they are in their marriage and their
Right.
life, etc. I don't know how any of my clients starting out in the divorce process or considering it may be able to answer those questions, like whether a $15 latte makes, that matters to them. So how do you even start that conversation? Because to me, if I'm listening and I'm in a tough, road, that would probably be more stressful to me than not talking about what really matters because I'm just trying
Right.
to get through the day.
Right. It's like,
So
what do you want? And you're like, I have no idea what I want. I know I
I wa-
don't want this, but I
Yeah,
don't know what I do want.
right. I want to get through this day and
Yeah.
not break down.
so let's talk a little bit about what a registered life planner is. So it's a three-part training. There's a two-part. The first is a 2-day course. George Kinder is and the Kinder Institute of Life Planning is who sponsors this program. The first course is the 7 Days of Modern Money Maturity. It's a book that he wrote. It's really about trying to help you understand how so many of the ways that we act around money relate to those things that we experienced growing up, right? Whatever it carries on. Like I'll tell you, I have a couple that I work with, and it's interesting because she's the one that's more financially knowledgeable in the family. He's not. But he has this thing that he wants to have a basically a farm so they can be all self-sustainable, and he doesn't want to have a mortgage, and he doesn't want to have any he wants to know that they could stand on their own. And she's not like that. She understands like a 3% mortgage is a really good thing because it's so cheap. And when I ask him about his early money memories, he tells me about the idea that when he was growing up, his family had a home, they paid it off, and then they moved to another home, but they kept the first one. And then the family had financial difficulties. And the only reason that they survived those difficulties is because they were able to move back to that first house that they owned free and clear. And that allowed them to get through it. So that sticks with him. And now that's why he has that view. So that's kind of the first part of the training. The second part, it's in person. Well, I did it in person. You can do it online. It was 5 days. We actually were in Hana in Hawaii,
Mm.
where
That's
George Kimber has a
awesome.
home, and we trained. It was in his house. That's the experiential part. We learn, and we also get partnered with another person that's there, and we life plan each other. And then the third part is a 6-month online mentorship where we meet as a group once a month, and then we meet individually with our coaches every month. So it's 2 meetings a month, and then you do case studies. So we life plan somebody, we write a case study, everybody in the group comments so that we can learn from each other. And so it's a very well-defined process. It has an acronym. It's called EVOKE. The first E is exploration. So an exploration meeting is really, why are you here? Why have you sought out my help? And then trying to get questions or information to help you think about what would be your most fulfilled life. I have some questions that I ask. Some people can just do it by asking that one question and just answering anything else, but it's really about listening. It's not about me talking. Like when I have those meetings, I have a AI tool that tells me how long I talk. I don't talk more than 10 to 20% of those calls. Sometimes it's less, depends on the client. Then we get to V. The V is the vision meeting. In the vision meeting, you're asked 3 questions before I asked them before the meeting and asked you to send me your answers, and then we talk through them. The first question is basically design your life. Imagine that money was no object. What would you do and how would you live your life? The second question gets a little bit harder. Money now is part of the equation. This time you go to your doctor. He gives you the unfortunate news that you have 5 to 10 years left to live. The good news is you're not ever going to feel sick. The bad news is you don't know when you're going to go. Now the question is, what would you do? How would you live your life? And what would you change? And then we get to the third question. And this is clearly the hardest one of all. Because this time you go to the doctor and you get the unfortunate news. Today's the day. You're going to go today. And now it's not what would you do? It's what did you not get to do? And who did you not get to be? So some people think it's a question about regret. I think about it the opposite way. It's about avoiding regret so that we can identify those things now that we can do so that we don't get to the end of our life not having done them. It's like I mentioned, one of the elements of my life plan is to establish a scholarship. Isn't it better to establish a scholarship while I'm here and I can actively participate in the process of selecting who gets the scholarship and see what benefit it brings and all those type of things, as opposed to having it be done after I'm gone and not get to see any of that? There's lots of elements to that. It's identifying these things that you'd really like to do that you might not have thought of, and you're going to have a much more fulfilled life if I can identify those things now. So by talking through these exercises, and then we have a couple other things. We have what's called a Hardcore Grid that helps you list out the things that you want to do, that you ought to do, and that would be fun to do, and that you have to do. You should, right? It's a grid, and we also give you a goals for life schedule. It kind of puts things out there, so we kind of make sure that we understand those different things that you want to do.
So, my question after hearing all of this is for how do you help somebody calm the F down so that you can even go through this process? Because I'm thinking that if a nervous person blows through your door and is like, I don't know if I can financially afford to get divorced and I'm miserable and I hate him and da, 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 da. And then you're like, what do you want in your life? And then she's be like, shut the fuck up. Where's the fucker? Like, so what do you, how do you get somebody in that state that you're in right now? And how do I get in this state that you're in right now? Because I'm digging this. But like, Do you dive right in, or do you try to, or like, how do I reframe my question? Do you talk about this stuff before you even talk about the money? And if so, how do you get them in the zone where they're ready to hear it?
So I would rather talk about it before the money
Okay.
because I think it's important because there's more to the process than we talked about. But the idea here is that we want to know. I use this acronym. It's not just about the money. Like some people say, we're trying to, at its essence, we're trying to align your money with your values.
Yeah.
But I go further than that. I use another acronym, team. And if we think about our capital or our resources, we have time, energy, attention, and money. We want to align all those things with our values. So it's about, I mean, I think lending an ear and listening, I think it's so important because so often people don't listen. It's like, you know, you tell to somebody, I went to so and so place. Oh, I was there and this is what I did, right? You use that as your avenue to talk.
Yeah.
I don't do that. You might say, "Oh, I went there too." But then ask, "What did you like?" Right? It's about getting them to talk, giving them space. I think that's really important. If they're really worried about those money things, we can change the order and move that up front. But I think it's most effective if we wait to talk about the money until after we've started to create the plan. Let me give
Okay,
you an
so let
example.
me jump in here
Sure.
because and I like where you're going. I want our listeners to know that legally, when you come to a divorce lawyer, we are going to attack two fronts. One is we're going to attack what could happen in the divorce, but that includes the money conversation. And so if someone comes into my door and says, I have no idea what I have, I don't know if I can get divorced, I don't know if I can live on my own, I basically say, okay, let's relax for 1 second and let's talk through what you do know. And the places that you don't know, we can certainly dig into and figure out, meaning we have the tools to get that information. So I want to assure every listener that if you're saying to me or saying to yourself right now, I have no idea what we have, I don't know if I can live, that is part of the divorce lawyer's job to work through that with you. We would also at times use someone like Phil, at least in my practice, to kind of dive into more money related issues. But whereas Phil maybe will talk more about, like he's talking about your life goals and those kind of things, it's our job as divorce lawyers to really kind of get in and get the information to you to say, this is what your path forward may look like. The second thing I want to mention is Phil, you have a very relaxing voice. And
Thank you.
Andrea and I said it's a real rainy day here, and that voice is just making me want to lay down and just, snuggle in, take a nap. I love it.
Thank you.
So let me, I want to progress this scenario that I played out. So let's say that this woman answers your questions and says, actually, you know what? I know what I want. I want to be able to have a small home with my children. It doesn't have to be the big house that I live in now. I don't want to have to work to the point where I never see my kids. I would like to be able to take vacations, at least once a year. And I'm nervous that if my ex doesn't want to contribute to the fullest for college, that I'm able to send my kids to college. That's as far as I can get you right now. But where I'm at right now, though, is that my husband is by far the breadwinner, and I don't know how much I'll get in a settlement or an alimony or whatever, and I'm terrified. And how can you help me, Phil, see if I can even afford to do this?
So that's where we get into the financial side, right? Because we want to make sure that we understand what those sources are. We want to know what your sources of income are or cash flow, whatever you want to call it, whatever's coming in. And then we want to understand what you can afford on the other side. And we can plan that. We we don't know when we do a financial plan, we don't know for sure everything is going to work out exactly as we say, but it gives
Mhm.
us an idea, right? We want to make more informed decisions so we can kind of figure out what can you afford and what can't you afford. And like that was really good, Andrea, because you identified a few things that were really important to you. So now we have some things that we want to make sure that those are in your financial plan. And now we want to figure out what can you afford that allows you to do those things. That's when we want to start to look at numbers and say, okay, now we understand this matters to you. These are the things that we want to do. And we know there's some other things that maybe aren't as become nice to have, right? Or those pie in the sky kind of things. Like if everything was perfect, we could do those. So we want to separate those different things out. And, I talked about the vision before. So we take when we take the three questions and we do it in something like this, like I'm going to give you an example of a vision statement, roughly. So I have
Mhm.
a client that I worked with, and her vision was basically something along the lines of this. She was in a high stress job. She eventually left because she realized that she and her husband had lived on one salary instead of two. So they were good at saving. And it gave her the ability to working together gave her the ability to not have to do that anymore. She left that job that she hated. So the life plan was basically it was going to be about 6 months later. She was working doing something different. She had just been to visit with her daughter who's in college, and they had watched them play football, and they had tailgated and had a really good time. She and her husband were gonna go ATVing in Tennessee because they have a home there and they like to go a second home there that they like to go to. They were sitting down eating dinner where there were vegetables from the garden that she had, and they were making plans to go see with who are they gonna spend Thanksgiving with. All those type of things are all covered in her plan, and I will tell you, I'll take this story to the outcome. It was a year later, and first of all, she had read my life plan's on my website, by the way, and she read my life plan and said, "Phil, thank you so much, because reading this made me realize I've been sitting here trying to build the biggest pile of money without thinking about why or what it was for." And that made her realize that. In February this year, she sent me an email. She said, "Phil, when I was in my 20s," and now she's in her 50s, she said she lives outside of Chicago. And she said, "I would go to Cubs games, and I see these old ladies that were like ushers and taking tickets and all that stuff." She said, "When I am older, I want to do that." So she said, I went to the Cubs website and they were hiring. So I applied for the job. I went in, I was wearing my Cubs jersey, my Cubs World Series t-shirt, and there were a bunch of younger kids there, and I got the job. So this year she's been working at Wrigley Field. I'm connected to her on Facebook. She posts pictures of all the different things that she's done at the games. Like she's been at special events, and it's not to make money. It's just because this is what she wanted to do. She invited me out to Chicago where I met with some of her friends and we talked about some of these things. And she told her friends that working with me changed her life because it made her reflect and change what she did. So, we get that vision. The next part then becomes obstacles. That's the O in a boat. The obstacles are what can possibly get in the way if you're doing these things. And again, I'm not telling you this is for you to think through. And we ask, who can help you with that? How can you do that? What are you going to do about it? And when? And that's probably the most important of all, is we put a time frame on it. Because if we don't, it's just like an abstract concept.
I think that what is important from what you just said is that people have to be really honest with what they really want, you know? I think that for a lot of people, I think your ego gets involved and you think you have to say that you want what everybody else wants. But there's nothing wrong with saying, I really just want to be an usher at Cubs games.
Right.
This is what's going to bring me joy. And I think that what's really hard, Phil, is that when you're going through a divorce, I think that people are in such a mental state of turmoil and an emotional state of like chaos that it's really hard to get your brain to that calm place where you can make these decisions. And I'm hoping that somebody like you who can take people through this process will really help them. Now, I think what remains unclear is can somebody really go through this process while they're going through a divorce? Because to me, this sounds like something that you really would have to do post divorce to be more mindful. Morgan, what's your take on that part?
I mean, I think for me, it would probably be something that I would recommend them to do, at the end of the divorce, post divorce, et cetera, if they're very anxious about money. Because I think that working through what your life might look like, about gathering information at the beginning, working through what your life might look like and whether that makes sense for you to move forward is what we would do process wise, at least with, hiring a divorce attorney. And I think that that would calm things. And one thing you said, Andrea, is so important. A lot of my clients, the ones who are really smart and divorce well, they think about their life and they think about, could they make sacrifices in the financial department and be okay? And I think it's kind of what Phil's talking about a little bit, but maybe repackaged a little bit differently. It's the way that they look at it, the ones that are really intelligent about it is, yeah, would I love to have as much money in my pocket as possible? Sure. But is it worth fighting tooth and nail to get that if my happiness is on the line? And can I take maybe a little less and be okay? Those are some of the discussions I have that are really smart and thoughtful with my clients and kind of make everybody calm down. One thing I want to mention is, people who are sitting there talking about the money topic, it is so stressful. And I always think about the line that money doesn't buy happiness. And I agree with that. But I would say that money doesn't buy happiness, but it does buy security. And if you had the money, you would feel more secure. So that's our job to make sure that your security is intact when you're talking to a divorce lawyer, if that's possible. And if it isn't, you should know it before you go into this process.
I also think that I really appreciate, Phil, your approach with this because I think that for somebody who feels very intimidated by money because they're feeling shameful that they don't understand as much, I think that having a conversation with somebody like you who isn't coming at them like, yeah, you're a real idiot for not getting this, and having the childhood that you had I think it really lends you to being a very calming, more holistic approach to helping somebody understand this. And I understand that it's really challenging to get into the weeds on a podcast about what someone should do and not do about with money because it's everything is so incredibly specific. However, on our show, we really pride ourselves on giving our listeners tangible action steps, things that they can do because we haven't done our job well if people don't walk away from each episode feeling more empowered than they did when they sat down to listen to it. So, with that, I want to throw something at you and I want to see how we can do this together. So, if somebody wanted to make some changes in their life, financially speaking, so they can feel more secure, what are 3 things that they can immediately do to feel less intimidated by money?
So there's really two ways I can come at that, because I can come
Okay.
at it purely from a financial side, or I can come at it more from the life planning side. So if
Let's
we
start
look
with
at
the financial side.
sure. So the first thing is understand what you have, right? Get your financial documents together, your bank statements, your investment accounts, your insurance policies, whatever you owe on credit cards and things like that. Understand what all that is. Maybe you want to start to use a budgeting app of some sort. I know a lot of people hear the word budget. It's a four-letter word, right? Like nobody really wants to budget,
Yeah.
but you want to at least be able to understand what your inflows are and what your outflows are. If your
Yeah.
inflows are greater than your outflows, that's a really good start.
Okay.
Then from there, you want to make sure you have an emergency fund. Like I have a client that I was speaking to in the past couple weeks, and she may be leaving her job. And fortunately, there's money set aside to protect her so that she does, and her family to protect her. I mean, they have twin daughters that are going to start college next fall.
Mhm.
Not the easiest time if something like that kind of disruption happens in life. But
Yeah.
having an emergency fund is really important. That for most people, they say 3 to 6 months is kind of the guideline. And I always say it's if you really feel secure, it's closer to 3. If you feel less secure, it's closer to 6. But
Okay.
that's really important. And then you want to set small, achievable goals. And if you ever read, like James Clear wrote a book called Atomic Habits, and this is
Mhm.
kind of where he talks about this concept a lot. Like if you want to set a goal, start small. Because if you start small, like if your goal is to lose 30 pounds, right? And that's all that you set out there, that's really hard to do because it's a big number. You might make a little bit of progress and you have a setback. It's more like, well, what can I think about? What can I do to do that? Maybe I can go for a walk for 30 minutes every day or something like that, because that's going to help. And then if you do that, or it's like, hey, if you want to start doing push-ups, right? You do one push-up, then you do, right? Now you do one, now you keep building. You want to set goals along the way that help you achieve your goals. Like I think back, the other part of my story that I didn't talk about was when I was in college. When I went back to school, I had to pay for it myself, and I had enough to pay off Duke, but I didn't have enough to pay for everything. So, you know, those credit card checks that you get in the mail? I
Yeah.
use those to pay for tuition, I use those to pay for my rent, and I finished my first year of work, and I looked at how much I paid in interest, and I was like, "Oh my god, I don't make enough to pay that." And I put together a plan without I know there's methods to do it. I didn't know anything about those methods. I happened to pick one just because I have a financial background, it helped. But I put together a plan and said, "Here's what I'm gonna do it by," and I attacked it one card at a time. So that way, as I went along, I saw signs of progress. So that's really important too. We might have long-term goals, but we wanna have short-term and intermediate-term goals along the way, because that really helps you achieve if you do that. So that's the
But
financial
here,
side.
Andrea, don't you talk about with our listeners all the time? It's, it's the ridiculous things, the goals. If you're in a really tough marriage and things are just going haywire, Andrea always says, go to the car wash, get a car wash, go on a walk. Those are all small
Accomplish
achievements.
one task. Accomplish one thing and you will feel, we feel better and we wanna keep going when we feel like we conquered something. You mentioned at the beginning of this, Phil, at beginning of your explanation that to use a budgeting app. Do you have budgeting apps that you like more than others? Is there something that we can leave these listeners with so they're like, "Oh, I feel better because I went and downloaded this."
So if you work I mean, people that work with me have access to a budgeting app through Right Capital, which is the financial planning software that I use. They have an app.
Uh-huh.
Personally, I've used Quicken since the time I got married, and I'm gonna be married for 30 years in June.
Okay.
So, that's what I use. There used to be Mint, but that's no longer what it was. There's something
Okay, so
a
the
lot of
old
people
school
use You Need a
Quickens.
Budget. YNEB is also another app that you can use.
Okay.
And the nice thing is you can tie these things to your bank accounts and to your savings account, your bank accounts, your credit card accounts, all those things. And then they pull through the expenses and then you just have to classify. And it just makes it a lot easier for you than like I remember when I bought my first house, there were no budgeting apps. I used to carry around a scrap of paper with me before I bought it because I wanted to make sure I could really afford it. And I would write down everything I spent. If I spent a quarter, I wrote it down. Like it was that granular I got. But then
Wow.
after a month, I put it into a spreadsheet and I looked and I said, okay, here's what I'm spending my money on. And if things get tight, here's the things that I can cut out. So then I knew that I could purchase that house. And this was before I was
$15
married.
lattes
So it
out
was
the window.
a hard thing.
Yeah. I think, this is what my biggest takeaway, guys, is, and you know me, I'm always gonna make things real simple for you. Um, the only way to feel less intimidated about money is to rip off that Band-Aid and to start looking at what you have. You have to look. You can't avoid the credit card statements. You can't avoid, looking at your bank account balance, which I will admit I hate checking my bank account balance sometimes. So I get it, but you have to know. You only know what you know. You don't know what you don't know. So you have to start looking and being aware. And you will eventually feel better once you are knowledgeable, but start tiny. Start somewhere. Look at one thing and then think about, okay, I was really nervous to check the bank balance because of I thought we were going to have negative $36, right? You checked it, you had $171. Well, it's better than you thought. Okay, I only have $171. Where do we go from here? But at least you know. Because what's worse is going to buy groceries and having your debit card denied. So You have to know. Now again, guys, it's really it's challenging for us to bring you episodes about the money thing because we want to be able to wave a wand and say, if you listen to this episode, we're going to help you. You're going to go from being nervous about money and whether or not you can leave your marriage to bippity boppity boo. Guess what? Now, not only do you know, but now we're going to give you all this money. You get a divorce and you get a divorce and you get a divorce. It just doesn't work like that, but I think the biggest thing is we're gonna help you know more, and the first step in knowing more is looking at what you have and talking about it. So with that, I don't wanna overwhelm everyone's brains. So Phil, if somebody wants to start this conversation with you, how do they do that, and what does it cost to get on the phone with you for a few minutes?
So the easiest thing to do is my firm is Apprise Wealth Management. My website is Apprise Wealth. That's APPRISE wealth.com. You can go to my website and you can click on schedule a call. There's no charge for an initial consultation. There's actually no charge until and unless you agree to become a client. So that can be more than one meeting because at the end of the day, this is about a relationship and you need to find the advisor that's right for you. And I'd rather and I need to find the client that's right for me too, right? There has to it goes both ways. You want to be able to work together.
Sure.
And I don't think that always sometimes it happens really quick. Like I've had sometimes, oh yeah, we finished the first call. I'm ready to work with you. But most of the time it doesn't because you need to think about this is an important decision. You talk about how hard it is. People find it easier to talk about sex than money, right? It's a really hard subject. And you
Yeah, I
need
don't
to find
recommend talking about money during sex though, you guys. I've tried it before, it didn't work out so well. I'm just saying, back to my mic issues with it drooping down, I could tell you what happened. So, Phil, thank you for being with us this morning. I think it's incredibly generous that you are willing to do free consultations with people. Our listeners are going to be clamoring at the opportunity to ask questions and start to learn more about what they can do to be a happier and financially healthier person.
Well, thank you. And I look forward to speaking with them.
Okay, good God Almighty, my brain is exploding. Thank God Phil has the most relaxing voice on earth because if you're out there and you're a listener, what he said was awesome. But I have to say, but if you're in a messy situation and you're already anxious and worried, probably a lot of that may have not gone into your head. So it might be an episode that you might want to come back to when you're in a better spot in general, because his planning sounds amazing. It's just that I know our listeners can be in a really tough spot where, really easy action steps are where you should be. And what Andrea said when she wrapped it up into a bow is exactly what I would say, which is start easy. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to be an investor. You literally should pull your bank accounts, maybe even look up my free credit report or pull a credit report on Experian. See what's going on with your credit and what bank accounts and what credit cards you have out there. That's a good first step. And that might be all you have capacity to do. And that is okay.
And if you see what you have and you're like, okay, now I'm still stuck with that same question, can I afford to do this? You're going to get your answer from more than one person. A financial planner is going to tell you things from their viewpoint. A divorce attorney is also going to give you a good ballpark answer of what it's going to look like to actually get divorced, because depending on how long you've been married, depending on how many children you have, depending on how much your soon to be ex makes, where you live, all these things can play a factor in how much money you will get on the other side of this and for how long. And that's going to that could play a role, a big role for some
Mm,
people in whether or
yeah.
not you can afford to get divorced. Now, the last thing I will say is money should not be something that keeps you in an unhealthy marriage. So whatever that means to you, that's something that I do want to leave you with, because no amount of money is going to make a person who is miserably suffocating breathe easily.
Mm.
It's just not.
Yeah.
It's gonna buy you pretty things, but at the end of the day, I mean, Morgan,
Take it.
you divorce plenty of people, Morgan, who have a lot of money. You divorce plenty of people who, on paper, could have chosen to live separate lives with all the
Yeah.
money they have, and they're still knocking down your door to be happier, you know?
Yeah, I think we're in an age right now where everyone's kind of seeing post COVID their own mortality and how they want to live their life. And I think everyone deserves to be happy. That's my thought. But I think that it's mandatory that you know what that would look like because knowledge is power and you get to make the final decision about how you live your life, which is so beautiful, honestly. When we're talking about financial advisors, what I would say, if you don't have one already coming into a divorce, I usually help people decide when to bring one on because sometimes what happens with financial advisors is, we're running the divorce route and they're running the financial discussion. And sometimes there's a lot of different ideas, and there's a time and a place for it where you don't get overwhelmed.
Right.
So that's why I would say talk to your divorce lawyer if you don't have a planner about not getting a planner's name. Maybe you already have a planner's name, but whether the timing is right on it. That's kind of my thought in general.
Same thing with getting a divorce. There's gonna be right timing in getting a divorce. A lot of this is about timing, which is why we talk about this a million times. All roads are always gonna lead back to who's the person who's helping you navigate this process, and it's gotta be the right divorce attorney for you. So, guys, we are so appreciative of everybody who listens to our show every week. We are here on a rainy Sunday morning in Chicago to bring you as much guidance, as much support, and at times entertainment, especially with my drooping microphone, so that you feel a little bit less alone in this, what can be a very isolating process.
Agreed. If you like our show, please go and rate us, review us, whatever you want. Send it to your ex. We don't care, but we do this for you. And remember, divorce is a marathon, it is not a sprint. And not every day is going to be a good day. In fact, some days are going to be really tough days, other days are going to be okay. So if you're having one of those moments, you might need to take it day by day, even hour by hour, and know that that is okay.
Go buy yourself a $15 latte. It'll be fine. Make it a pumpkin spice one. 'Tis the season. Guys, I promise you, as much as you don't believe it, you will get through this. You will, you will, you will. And remember, you have got this, my friends. And
And we
we have
have
got
got you.
you.